What's up, you guys out there? Welcome to Gamers with Gains. This time I'm going to be talking about Final Fantasy XIV, one specific game. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of insight pretty much on my relationship and my story with the actual MMO games of the Final Fantasy series. You guys know I'm a big FF fan and I love playing the main series of games and even some of the spin-offs and such. But let's give you guys a little bit of backstory here. So, back in the day, coming off of 10, 7, 8, and 9, 4, and 6, and such of the main games of the series, all those Final Fantasy games, I never looked at the MMO games for the longest time as mainstays to the actual main series of Final Fantasy. I always felt that at that time, back then, that pretty much they really were changing up the formula, and it wasn't necessarily the type of Final Fantasy of which I knew. You know, coming off of Final Fantasy X, right before 11 came out and such, and I found out it was going to be an MMO. At that point in time, a lot of MMO games that were, being released on for the PC and such, I really had a bad taste in my mouth about. It really much was like, you had games like RuneScape, which were RPGs or MMOs that, they were web-based and they were on the PC, and they required you to do a lot of meaningless tasks and a lot of repetitive tasks in either to level up a certain skill or level up just in general your overall character in order to progress a little bit over time. And then most of them at that time frame had a lot of subscription services. They had little different microtransactions that would kind of like feed money off of you on top of the subscription that you actually had to pay in order to continue playing the game from month to month. To me, that always was like, no, this is not the type of like FF game that I actually really want to play. I don't want to be able to kind of get stuck in this type of loop after just playing games like RuneScape, which I really didn't enjoy too much, in the grand scheme of things. That wasn't my type of Final Fantasy, and I didn't actually look at FF11 when it was released as a mainstay in the actual Final Fantasy series. I always felt that Square Enix should have just kind of spun that off into a different type of game, like one of the type of spin-off games or subgenres of that game series, in order to kind of like keep the traditional 1 through 15 now at this point, specifically games that told an overarching story between 30, 40 hours with a cast of characters and a primarily single-player experience, a single-player solo experience for me. That was my Final Fantasy, pretty much of what I love to enjoy over time. So I skipped out on 11. I had a lot of friends that actually stuck with 11 ever since on the PlayStation 2 days, all the way up to now through 14 and all the botched launch that game had. Now they're on the actual legacy servers for Final Fantasy XIV, Heavensward, or Realm Reborn. But moving on after that, pretty much 12 came out. It had a couple of different MMO type of like features that were similar to like something you would find in like Dot Hack or the Dot Hack series, where it was kind of like simulating an MMO world. But it had some like different type of features that, specifically in the battle system and a couple spots here and there that were a little bit reminiscent of an MMO, where, almost similar to kind of like blending the two type of gameplay styles into one. But it was still primarily a single player experience, type of my FF game that I would actually dive into and such. And then obviously 13 came out, and then that game was really divisive amongst a lot of fans. Some people kind of like it, some people really hate it. Myself, I actually kind of dislike the series. So FF13 series was like a really big botch for me, but it was still primarily a single player game, a traditional Final Fantasy, if you will, as far as part of being the main series. So 14 finally comes out. 14 has a botched launch. It really almost reinforced a lot of the reasons why I didn't see that style of Final Fantasy game in kind of like relation to the rest of the games in the series. And I really tried to avoid it, and I really kind of stood away. And then eventually, finally, released a Realm Reborn, which is what we have now, which is kind of like the reimagining or re-envisioning of what that game was going to be. It was completely fixed up a lot of like the different glitches and like, problems from the initial launch. And now it's on PlayStation 4, it's also on PC and such. So, at this point, I have more friends that were kind of like diving into it, and now we're in the realm after World of Warcraft where MMOs could be a little bit much more streamlined and such, and different things were being done with the MMO genre. They still had those subscription-based services and things like that, and they still had their own ways of like leveling up, that was different than what I'm used to or what I was actually, really kind of like gravitating towards. But they were still changing in their own way. I had a lot of friends now, this time, besides the ones that were sticking with the game ever since 11, now jiving into this actual game and telling me, hey, listen, you actually got to play this. You actually got to really kind of like, explore this as a Final Fantasy fan. You would probably like this. So I kind of dodged it a little bit. I was like, you know what? Maybe, again, it's still not me. Again, I really don't look at this as like the big kind of like main parts of the series and such, but I never actually really dived into 14. So eventually at some point, more recently, like I want to say within the past like month or so, I dived into finally play Final Fantasy XIV, especially now that Heavensward came out, which Heavensward is the latest expansion. A Realm Reborn was the kind of like reboot of Final Fantasy XIV Online, and now Heavensward was like the real big kind of like major release expansion that tells you extra story, increases the level cap and stuff, and things like that. So the point that I'm trying to get across is that eventually over time, after finally actually playing it and actually really immersing myself in 14 and seeing what that game is about, I actually was pleasantly surprised that it actually does still feel like a Final Fantasy game to me. It's still, despite it being an MMO, it's still a traditional type of take on Final Fantasy in the series. There's a lot of references to older games, you know, between the classes, between some of the stuff that you actually do, the mounts, which are pretty much different things you could ride that you actually come into contact with throughout the world as you play and such. You know, there's a lot of different nods here and there, and a lot of different approaches for the game, both in terms of the narrative and also some of the gameplay elements while you're playing that hark back to traditional Final Fantasy. And as going through that, I was really pleasantly surprised and pleased to see something like that. You know, not only to be proven wrong a little bit, but also to kind of discover an extra kind of like, you know, layer to the love of what I have for the Final Fantasy series. Right now, currently, on my character, I play on the PlayStation 4 most of the time. I actually play as a Thermitage. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But basically, it's the Black Mage class of characters that pretty much yields magic. And my character actually looks like a red mage and such. I wish I could show you guys a picture at this point, but basically he just looks like a red mage with like the traditional like black mage hat that's just red and a red cloak and such. Looks pretty cool, I have to admit. I was really pleased to see like, you know, how big some of the worlds or like the towns and stuff you could explore. The worlds that you actually explore in this game is, you know, huge. I believe, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Orenzia or something like that, where it's just massive. There's so many places to go to, so much rich story to kind of like pull from. Now, to be honest with you, there are still a couple things that I'm still a little apprehensive about. I'm still a little apprehensive of how long it usually takes for you to level up. Like right now, currently, I believe my character's already in like the 30s or 40s or so, and I'm still playing like through the main story and everything. But again, you have to do a lot of quests. You have to do a lot of fetch quests. This is like one of the Final Fantasy games that I played that has the most fetch quests. That you have to run from different spots, you know, to meet up with a certain person, to give them an item, or to deliver an item to a certain area or whatnot. It just really was a lot of that. And that gets a little bit boring, a little bit repetitive. But one thing I will say, which really kind of did it for me, is like really got me to like start resonating with the game, is the kind of dungeon runs that you could actually do. There are like these raids, right? Where you make a party of 4. You get match made with like a couple different members, and everybody takes up a specific role depending on your class. So in my case, I was a Thermitage, or one black mage in the game. I was pretty much the DPS kind of guy, the damage per second, that's from afar, throwing magic, and actually trying to take down enemies, while some of the other guys, that's either like a tank character that takes a lot of damage but deals physical damage, the healers healing the rest of the group, and we would all work together as a 4-man group, kind of like 4 warriors of light, in order to get a specific dungeon done, where we could fight a boss, complete it, find all the loot, and kind of move on and level up our characters and such. That was really cool, because to me, that was like a different type of approach to traditional Final Fantasy. You got 4 characters, 4 warriors of light on a quest in a particular dungeon, taking out one big bad guy. And that's what really did it for me. It was really, really cool to go through that. I'm probably going to be doing it again, probably tonight, if anything, because I want to keep kind of trying to level up to the level cap over time, which the level cap, by the way, is 60 with Heavensward. If you can actually pick up Heavensward either on the PlayStation 4 or on the PC. I know they're having some problems on Mac right now. You know, they had a whole big thing that it really wasn't running properly or whatever. But if you're on a traditional Windows PC or on the PlayStation 4, you could definitely enjoy the game. So overall, what do I really think about Final Fantasy XIV right now? Well, again, I'm glad that my old kind of like stubborn purist FF fan mindset was kind of like changed over time, especially really spending time with the game and really exploring like some of the brighter aspects of what I thought was going to be a bad experience, be a bad MMO experience that wasn't Final Fantasy to me, ended up actually being something that really was a kind of like an expansion and an evolution of the Final Fantasy formula, but just delivered in a different way. So I was really kind of happy about that, and I'll definitely continue checking out. So that's just my thoughts on Final Fantasy XIV, or Realm Reborn, or Heavensward, whatever you guys want to call it, or whatnot. But leave me a comment in the comment section below. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys want to see some gameplay, I was actually thinking about maybe putting up like a video or two here and there, like showing my actual character, going through some of the stuff that I do, and talking through some of the actual things that I do in that game, or like what normally some people that are new to it, that are probably like myself, don't know about the game. So Put a comment section down below and leave me your questions as well so I can answer them in a future video. And I will talk to you guys again real soon. So hopefully I can talk to you guys about another game, maybe talk a little bit more about Final Fantasy XIV in the future. And I will see you guys later. Peace out. Stay epic, everybody.